All right, how's it going, y'all? So this is going to be the tour of my completely chaotic but functional smart home. This is a smart home that I did not actually build. The previous owner did it entirely himself, and I've kind of just inherited it and brought my own things to it. But this is going to be a tour of the entire smart home, as well as really lessons learned and things that other people should look at before building their own smart homes, because it's a lot. It's a current market that's very difficult to get into, and there's just so many people out there right now because it's so new that are all pushing their own standards. So right now there's really no just one centralized standard for smart homes. It's on the books and people are working on that, but there's no just one centralized standard. And so if you want to build your own smart home, then you really have to figure out exactly what you want and invest in an ecosystem that is going to work for you. There are so many different options out there, and this home happens to have pretty much every single one of them. It is an eclectic, chaotic mess of different smart home technologies, from Z-Wave all the way into different proprietary standards, and I've duct taped it all together into my Apple HomeKit environment using Homebridge. So this is going to be a full tour of that. I'm also going to talk about really what devices make sense to be smart. Because so much of the time, you can spend a ton of money, a ton of configuration, and a ton of pain trying to get a device like an oven, a refrigerator into a smart home, when what is that purpose? It's not going to do anything for you. And really, I think there are three devices that make a ton of sense to be smart, and I found to be super useful. The first one, easily the most obvious, is going to be lights. Lights, and I'll also throw in motion sensors for people who are interested in that. Having your light switches completely smart home controllable is awesome. It's so nice to be able to walk out of the house with all the lights on and just have, boom, all the lights turn off when everybody in the house is left because they know your phone's radius. That is such a great feature. An extension of that is going to be motion sensors. So you can set up automated tasks where if a room has had its light on for more than 10 minutes and no motion has been detected during that time, it will just automatically turn the lights off, saving you electricity. And so that is a great option. Next up is going to be a smart thermostat. A smart thermostat makes a ton of sense and can just save you a ton of money, honestly, and also saving the environment as a nice bonus. Smart thermostats are great because they allow you to just control your thermostat from anywhere in the world. And so if you're going to be gone, you can easily just turn it down and then say, oh, I'm on my way home. I'm going to turn on the AC, so that way it's not blistering hot when I get in the house. And this gives you the flexibility to really feel like, oh yeah, it's not a big deal to turn up my AC really hot during the day, saving you and the environment. And finally, number three is going to be smart locks. Smart locks, they're a little bit more contentious because it is a vulnerability into your house. But let's be honest here, you can pick a lock or you can just punch through a window. So it's really not that big of a security issue. I mean, honestly, if somebody wants to get into your house, they can probably get into your house anyway without going through these insane exploits. I will leave an awesome video that Destin from Smarter Every Day did about how with a laser, many smart devices can be hacked to actually just send a voice command. And so smart locks can in a way be vulnerable, but my opinion, it's completely fine as long as you're using encrypted protocol. But I'll leave that link to that video in the description below. It's worth a watch after this if you're interested. But smart locks are so nice because you can easily say, oh hey, somebody's at the door, let them in. And then I'm going to throw out one more one that is really an honorable mention because it doesn't apply to every single person, and that is going to be a smart sprinkler system. If you have sprinklers, having them smart is awesome. Having them smart allows them to hook up to the weather and say, oh, it's raining right now, no need to run them. It allows you to have it go through and intelligently know it's been really hot this week, use a little bit more water. It's not been that sunny this week, we probably don't need to use as much water. And it can save tons and tons of water because of that. And so smart sprinkler systems are a great option if you need that. Though having them integrated into a full home kit and actually being able to access them from your like Apple Smart Home tab doesn't make a lot of sense unless you want to be able to say, hey Siri, turn off the sprinklers if you're getting sprinklered on while you're outside. But that's the only real use case I can see for that. So honestly, while I'm a tech guy, having a smart home was never something I necessarily really planned on. Like I always liked having hue bulbs, so I would have a hue bulb in my bedroom, and so about 10 minutes before my alarm would go off, it would go ahead and turn on to about 1%. And so that way it's enough light to subconsciously get you up and slowly rise you up. And that was really nice. But then I moved into this home, and being able to control every single light in it has made me absolutely want this. How many of you really want to retire in a smart home like this? I honestly do. Like, I did not realize how important that was going to be for me. But there is an issue. A lot of people right now are worried about their ability to retire due to high inflation cutting away at savings, as well as markets being down almost across the board. In fact, the S&P is already down 17% this year, and major stocks like Amazon are already down 30, 40, and even some cases 50% this year alone. In these situations, experts generally recommend two things: diversify your portfolio and invest in funds that have very low volatility. Sounds like a tough task, right? It actually does not have to be. There is already an asset class out there that checks both those two boxes. But up until now, it was reserved for billionaires to safely store their wealth. It's even estimated that over half of high net worth investors allocate at least 10% of their entire portfolio to it. Because it's an alternative asset, it's great for diversifying outside of traditional stocks and bonds, and it's a natural inflation hedge. Not only is it a natural inflation hedge and diversifier, it's also got extremely low volatility. In fact, it's got some of the lowest correlation to the stock market of any asset class at negative 0.12. In the past, it would take millions of dollars to access this asset class, but now you can get its benefits at a price that works to you thanks to today's sponsor, Masterworks. This company is offering members access to this asset class and growing rapidly because of it. They're already valued at billions of dollars because of this, making them a true startup unicorn. Now, demand is high, so there is a wait list, but my viewers are able to skip this wait list by clicking the link in the description to join over 400,000 other members already using Masterworks. Thanks to Masterworks for sponsoring today's video. So now I want to talk about the three really important things that anything involving a smart home needs. Any critical device needs to kind of have these three different things for me to really consider it as part of any smart home, and I would really recommend you do the exact same thing. The first off is the ability to work locally. That means that if your internet connection is cut off, these devices still need to work in their intended method. That will save you on two different fronts. One, if the company ever goes down, it will all still work. Or if your internet goes down, same thing. If those servers are ever unreachable, it still should work. And two, it'll also really help you from lag. Having every single time you click a light switch for your internet to start a new connection to a web server and then it pass back and then send it to the light switch to turn on means that you will have noticeable latency every single time you try to turn on a light. And that is going to be rough, and you will have glitches, and it will not be a good user experience whatsoever. And so when you're local, you really need to be able to access everything locally. Two, if it is crucial, it needs a manual option always. That means Wi-Fi is down, all network traffic in the entire house is completely down. It needs to be able to operate locally. These are a great example for that, because this is just a light switch. But its state can be completely controlled from your phone. And so that means that it's got the ability to work locally, as in just a normal light switch, so you don't have to pull out your phone every single time you want to turn on your lights. But it also gives you the dual option. Really would recommend that for every single smart home appliance that's crucial. And now number three, which is not nearly as important, but it's still quite nice, is it needs to be interoperable with a common app. For many people, this is going to be either Home Assistant, Apple HomeKit, or Google Home. Those are the three big players that people often use, and they should all integrate into one of those three ecosystems. There's also something like the Habitat that it does allow you to integrate into everything else and kind of acts as a common hub, but nobody's using a Habitat for every single time they want to turn on their lights. Instead, it should be interoperable with those three protocols to be a good smart device. And so to minimize headache with a smart home, really make sure that every device you're purchasing that's critical fits into those three categories. All right, and so now I want to talk about this guy right here. This guy right here is probably the best starting place for the vast majority of people who really want to go all in on a smart home. And this is a GE Z-Wave smart light switch and dimmer. Pretty much what it allows you to do is this acts as a virtual light switch as well as a physical light switch. So down turns the lights off, up turns them on, and then if you hold it, it's also a dimmer. So that means it's got the great local everything works, while also being allowed to be controlled via Z-Wave so that you can control it from your smart home and integrate it into any of your apps. And so because of that, I think that these are the way that most people should start in. Now, I'm not saying you need this exact light switch. I'll go through and leave all this stuff at Amazon, links to it in the description below, but this is what you should start with. You need to start with smart light switches if you really want a true smart home and have everything integrated, because it's going to give you the least amount of headaches. The other option for lighting would be smart light bulbs, which are going to be more expensive, and it's going to fail the constraint generally that it's got to work locally. Because if somebody turns off lights, oh, now they can't be controlled from the phone and everything breaks. And so you really want to make sure that if you're going all out for it, think about, if at all possible, using a smart light switches, which will be far more cost effective in pretty much any single case, unless you want to just start with one or two, which I actually started with 2, and throw them in some lamps. And so in this house was the previous owner's, the only way I can describe it is experimental ground for a smart home. And so we've got at least 6 different types of smart light switches spread out across 3 different protocols, all kind of just duct taped together, and that is just for lights. If we include the front and back door locks, which are both entirely different ecosystems, the thermostat, the garage door, the sprinkler system, it's all just really elegant chaos, and that's the only way you can describe it. It is all able to be duct taped together using a very important app called Homebridge. For me, I'm an iPhone user. All of Katie and I's devices pretty much are iPhone devices, at least all of our devices that we would actually control the lights with, and so HomeKit is perfect. We use Homebridge to duct tape all these different devices from all these different ecosystems into one centralized area. And so that way, it generally gives us the ability to operate entirely locally. While that is not necessarily entirely true for Google things, Google likes control of your data. Google wants to always be online. And so generally Google appliances, which they've been buying a lot of, such as Nest as well as Yale, have to be hooked up to the cloud. And so they do fail my #1 constraint there, unfortunately, but I don't think Google's going under anytime soon, and I didn't purchase them. They came with the house. All right, so now I'll go ahead and start and just show my Homebridge setup here. And so as we can see right here, everything is able to be controlled via HomeKit. This is the way that I control pretty much everything, and it's not necessarily perfect. For some reason, even though it's got decent Wi-Fi, the ratio, which I do love, will sometimes have no response in HomeKit, but it always seems to work on the app. I'm not too concerned about it. I never really use just HomeKit for controlling my sprinklers because 1, they're smart and they just do it on their own, and 2, the app's actually very usable for any custom configuration. But everything here in every single light switch in the entire house is smart. And it can be a bit chaotic because of that. So right here, I have a Yale door that is one of the Yale doors that is only compatible with Google, but I'm still able to hit it right there. And it is able to lock just like that because of Homebridge. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pull up Homebridge. Right here is my Homebridge virtual machine, and it's actually got fairly few plugins. Really the only 2 that needed direct control into Apple HomeKit that were not otherwise accessible were going to be Habitat, which is how I control my Z-Wave light switches, as well as Nest. And Nest will also include my Yale lock that is under Google control. And I will warn people, Google is trying their best, as far as I can tell, to kill off this app, because Google wants you in the Google ecosystem. And so if you are looking to purchase a Nest and you want to just use it with Apple Home, I would recommend looking at a different manufacturer probably. because it's an entirely confusing process to set this up. And they very clearly are trying to kill off the ability to do it. And so I would not recommend Nest if you are trying to be an Apple user only. They do have ones that work directly with HomeKit. But Habitat worked flawlessly. I was able to pull in everything very quickly. And there are just so many great apps out here. Then I'm gonna go ahead and show you in a minute here all the different boxes I need to bring everything into Apple HomeKit. And it is a ton, but it all kind of comes together pretty decently well. But first I'm gonna pull up Habitat, which is the way that I control all my Z-Wave and Zigbee devices. It is not necessarily a beautiful interface, but I've found they have better apps than pretty much anybody and easier to integrate with. I'm currently looking into Home Assistant, but for Home Assistant, they seem very strict on which apps can even be allowed on the community store. And so because of that, a lot of people install hacks, which is Home Assistant kind of unlocked apps that are kind of chaotic. But it's very difficult to do. And I mean, I know my stuff generally with tech, and I've not been able to. And I spent a good hour trying to get hacks installed, and I was just unable to do it. I don't know if all the guides are out of date or if it no longer works for the most recent version of Home Assistant, but I would not recommend, at least at this time, using Home Assistant if you're trying to duct tape together a ton of different systems, at least as of right now. I have heard of a lot of people getting very cool dashboards and stuff out of it, but in my experience, bringing in a bunch of stuff was far easier with Habitat than it was with Home Assistant, though I will still be looking at that. And Home Assistant does have great Z-Wave and Zigbee support, which are going to be by far your most common options. So this right here is Habitat, and I'm going to go and show you all the different smart options here, and we can see all the different devices that are in here. It is so many of them, and this is only half of them, because the other half of the light switches are Lutron. I told you, this was a testing ground for different smart technologies. Overall, I will say the Lutron, while far more expensive, have been far more reliable in terms of not failing. The reason I have this guy right here is he died, and I'm waiting to go and RMA him. I think that was somewhat regular. I do think they've gotten better now, and I have heard the RMA process is very easy, but the Lutrons, if you have the money and you really want to build a very nice smart home and you don't care about anything other than getting an Apple ecosystem, Lutron is probably the way to go if you've got the money once again. But Z-Wave and Zigbee are great open standards that allow so many things to interoperate. These are all Z-Wave devices, which means that they are able to build a mesh network out, and so you do not have to worry about every single device being close enough to the centralized hub to operate. Instead, it just has to be close enough to a device that's close enough to a device to close enough to a device that is close enough to the device to the hub. And so because of that, it's a great mesh protocol, and it's got very low power draw and very low overhead, and it's very low latency. Smart devices are not sending much data whatsoever. They're sending a simple status, on, off, and maybe a battery. Because of that, they only are transferring kilobytes per second of data at their maximum throughput. And so you really do not need a lot. And so a low energy mesh network is perfect for that application. And so a lot of people who are looking to build their full-blown smart homes need to decide between Zigbee and Z-Wave. You can do both, but if at all possible, pick one and go for it. I am not an expert enough to tell you which one to do. Do some research. They've both got pros and cons. I do think that Zigbee tends to be a lot cheaper per device. There's a lot more devices that support it because it's not got nearly the same amount of testing required to add into the standard, where Z-Wave, every device has to be approved to get on the standard. And so you do get better quality devices, but they also are more expensive and fewer because of it. So this is the back end on how everything works. I have all these different light switches, half these light switches, all coming in and talking to the Habitat hub. The Habitat hub then has this app for Homebridge, which allows it to be plugged into Homebridge, the app, which allows it to be plugged into my Apple ecosystem. And so there's actually quite a few hops to get the packet across, but it works very effectively and I really do not notice. For example, I can just go ahead and turn on the kitchen lights and they change very quickly over all the way up. I don't even know if they show up on camera. You may be seeing a strobe right now. I need to replace some bulbs. They're LED bulbs, and because of that, they sometimes flash if they're turned up too high. As I said, it's an eclectic, chaotic smart home. But it's fairly low latency, even though it's making it hop through a lot of different apps. And it's totally accessible offline. I can kill the internet and this will still completely work, which is exactly what I wanted. And so then I've also got multiple other hubs hooked up directly in here. So I've got a few different options here. So first off is the Homebridge VM, and so that brings in all of my Z-Wave devices from Habitat, as well as pretty much any other things that are not compatible directly with Apple HomeKit. Then I've got both Hue bulbs that I brought to this house, as well as this right here, which is a Lutron centralized hub. And so then the way the Apple HomeKit setup works for remote access is having home hubs. And so there's a few different options. You can either use an iPad, an Apple TV, or a smart speaker. All of them have to be the Apple ones, and they can be a hub. And so the hub is effectively what is used as the away from home turn on and off the devices because you need something locally running. And so as you can see, both my Apple TVs in the house are set up for that. There is the primary, which is the bedroom, and then there is the living room, which is the standby. And so those are used to turn on and off any HomeKit devices from outside of the local network via iCloud. And so now I want to give the tour of all the different smart devices and show you which ones I really like and which ones I do not, because there's quite a few of them. I'm not even gonna show all the different smart light switches in this video. All right, and we did not have to go far to find the first thing. I'm gonna go over the smart light switches right here. And these are the sample ones. And they actually, in my opinion, work pretty well. They've kind of got two different states. Well, there's the on-off toggle right here that allows the lights to go on and off. And then there is a safety lockout. This is kind of dumb, but it's technically required so they don't get sued. So when you're changing a light bulb, you don't want to be changing a light bulb with a live wire because it's actually pretty easy to accidentally stick your finger in the light socket and electrocute yourself. Will that kill you? Probably not. Don't do it. Don't try that at home. But I've been shocked before. It hurts, but it's not terrible. So since these are controllable from the internet, and with technology you never know what can go wrong, the way they're set up is they've got these little lockouts right here at the very bottom that actively have a physical switch that cuts it off entirely. So when that switch is flipped, it does not matter what the state is on the light switch, doesn't matter what you put on your phone, there's no way to turn the light on. So that's just a guaranteed cutoff switch. This blue light switch right here, I don't know if you can see that, is one of the newer models that I actually quite like its feature. It is able to glow blue when it is off. And it's actually programmable, so you can turn it on and off however you'd like to. If you want to, you can say, if it's on, go blue. But it's quite nice because it allows you to easily see, hey, where is the light if it's dark and if it's off or not. So I think that's a really nice feature. And those are just some really nice things that you can see with a smart home. These are all controllable via Z-Wave, and they are also GE light switches. I'll leave a link to them in the description below. They're very cost effective compared to other options, but they have a failure rate that's non-zero. Now, there are probably 40 light switches in here of this brand, and we've only had one of them fail after a while, so I think we're probably okay. I think it's a low failure rate, but there is a failure rate to them, though the RMA process is apparently very, very, very easy. I did not perform the RMA process, the previous owner did, because one of the light switches failed ahead of time. The other nice thing about having Z-Wave or Zigbee light switches is the fact that they are always hooked up to mains power. That means they operate as essentially bridges that allow any other device to talk to the hub. This is really important because that process of being a hopping point can actually start to really take down your battery if it's a battery powered device. And so both standards, both Zigbee and Z-Wave, automatically set any devices that are hooked up to main power they prefer those as the hops. And so that way you're not burning out the battery of a temperature sensor or something like that that's purely battery powered by having it hop all these different signals. Instead, you use something like this that essentially has infinite power and therefore is not going to burn out its battery. All right, so now that is a primer of the Z-Wave one. I could show you more. There's so many different Z-Wave switches in here because he was trying out and finding the best ones, but these are probably my favorite. Though the one thing that annoys me, and I think it's actually possibly just the light bulbs, we have LED lights in here, is the fact that when you hit them on, it takes a second, enough where you think, is this working? And so there's a ramp from when you turn it on, and then it slowly brings out the light, rather than just a flash on. And so because of that, when we were first in the house, we were not used to that at all. And so it's like, did it turn on? Is this the right light switch? And then you're like, okay, yeah. But that was one really annoying thing, though I do think we need to blame that actually on the LED bulbs rather than these dimmers. All right, and so now the next option we've got is going to be the Lutron switches, which I'll show you in there. And then from there, I'm gonna take you back in the server laundry room networking box and show you the immense amount of hubs that are required for running my smart home. So then right here are my other half of my light switches, the Lutron smart switches. And they kind of have a different philosophy. They're push button rather than the other ones that are kind of emulating a regular light switch just without actually having states. So they're always in the middle. You tap up to turn them on, down to turn it off, always. This is much more of a simplified setup for that. It's top button for on, bottom button for off. And in the middle, there are little LEDs right here that show you the status of what's going on. It shows you how bright it is, and you can toggle it off by holding up and down to the exact brightness you need. These are the Lutron ones, and they actually operate on their own proprietary standard, and so they don't mesh with any other devices, but they've been incredibly reliable, and they also do use, very similar to the way that Zigbee and Z-Wave work, they also have their own mesh setups, so you don't need a hub in every single room. Instead, you just need to make sure there's enough light switches around to all communicate with each other. And so it's quite funny, because of that, the previous owner spaced out different light switches in different parts of the house, clearly making sure that there's always a hop you can make, because it goes from here to that bedroom into the master bedroom to make sure that the Lutrons also work, because the Lutrons are in the master bedroom, because in his experience, and I've had the same one, the Lutron ones tend to be more premium and work better, especially for fans. I'm very much a fan of the Lutron fan setups for those. Those have worked very well and have just been great. So I really like those, though they cost an arm and a leg. They also make some smart blinds that I would love to have, but are entirely outside of my budget. All right, and so now, before we go on to anything else, I want to talk about what's down here. His name is Ralf. All right, and so no smart home could be complete without a smart vacuum cleaner that vacuums your entire house for you on command and actually works really well. And so because of that, Ralf has to be mentioned. I will look up what model he is and put a link to it in the description below, because he is absolutely awesome. I've had Roombas before. We got my mom one for Christmas one year. And if you do not get the ones that have the smart maps and the cleaning and all that stuff, it's not nearly as worth it as it is if you have something like this. This model, while it does have a camera on it, which kind of I don't love, but it does an incredible job of mapping your entire house automatically and self-cleaning. So he is actually a smart vacuum cleaner that actually builds an entire map of your house on his own. Then you just say, okay, these are the different rooms, and you can tell him to vacuum a specific room. It is insanely smart. It's always able to get to its home because of that. It knows where everything is and makes great vacuum lines. Then when it's either running low on power, or if its bag is full in here, it'll return to the base station automatically, empty itself, charge itself up, and then go back and finish the job. It has been insanely reliable for us and has just absolutely made it worth it. If you are going to get a Roomba, I would highly recommend getting one that has the smart mapping features. Honestly, this guy right here, they are not cheap. They're significantly more expensive, but in my experience, The ability to just always go home, and really, this thing runs without us thinking about it. Luckily, we don't have cords out that often, and so pretty much anytime we're able to run them, but it is able to vacuum our house while we're at work almost flawlessly. The only time he's gotten stuck is we've got a cabinet right here that's just tall enough for him to get underneath because it's a carpet, but not get out of. Other than that, once we blocked off that part, he has had zero issues whatsoever and just works insanely well. Now, he breaks a lot of the smart home rules. He requires a cloud service. He actually talks to Roomba to do everything. But there is at least a manual on and off in here. You can hit clean and you can click go home, all on here. But because it works so well, I do not care about that. And let's be honest here, having a clunky integration into Apple HomeKit when it's not necessary would not be great. There is a HomeBridge plugin for him apparently that I might try out, but the app is pretty smart and allows you to run specific things. And for me, I'm never saying, hey Siri, have Ralph clean the bathroom. I'm just not gonna do that. It's easy enough in the app to tell him what to do, and I think it's absolutely awesome. So I had to give him an honorable mention. All right, I apologize for the noise, both in audio and most likely in video. Horrible lighting in here, but this is the laundry room networking closet. And this is now the centralized hub of my smart home, which it moved from the standard server rack back in there. So for those of you who have not seen my setups before, I pretty much got two different networking boxes. This one right here, which is in charge of networking. Then in my guest bedroom, a 42U rack that is taller than I am. It is massive data center style and complete overkill. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. But that is basically all the server home lab stuff. And then here is the basic networking. The mentality with this is the critical infrastructure that keeps the Wi-Fi going. Everything in here needs to still work should my server rack go down, because I'm a tinkerer. The server rack is going to go down. So I keep everything nice in here, and everything always should be running in here. So I recently moved all the smart home gear, all the smart home hubs into here to avoid the fact that if I shut down something in the server rack, I will then lose my ability to control all my smart devices. Now that being said, until I get a little Raspberry Pi, another Raspberry Pi in here that's going to be running HomeBridge in here rather than my virtual machine. Technically, my virtual machine would take out the HomeBridge, which would keep me from being able to turn on some of my lights. But it's a work in progress. And this right here is the epitome of smart home technology today. Hopefully it's going to get fixed in the next 5 years, 10 years. But right now there are so many competing technologies, you have so many options. And because of that, you end up with a lot of things. So I've got 3 different smart hubs right here. I've got my Habitat, my Hue bulbs, and my Lutron hub. And those are just for lights. Luckily, both the Lutron and the Hue bulbs integrate directly with Apple HomeKit, which is great. That means that they don't need to go through HomeBridge or anything like that, and they tend to work a little bit better in my opinion. But then the Habitat does not work directly with HomeKit, and so I use HomeBridge for that. And all these hubs are required, and they all have their own radio signals out here that all have to communicate over 3 different protocols. And so fortunately, every single one of these has the ability to actually build up a mesh network. Otherwise, this would not be possible. This is a metal rack, which means that it's not great for radio waves, and it also is on the corner of my house. That means it's horrible placement for things in the bedroom, which are on the opposite side of the house. But because they are able to use this mesh networking technology, they are able to communicate through other light switches to further light switches in the house, which is the only reason this works. And that's why having just Wi-Fi devices is not a great idea for the vast majority of your infrastructure. The other advantage of this is you only have a couple of clients on the network, and so you're not overloading your Wi-Fi network, which can actually happen with broadcast traffic. And if you had every single light bulb controlled via Wi-Fi, you would have a nightmare of a time because you would just have so many devices on the subnet. all communicating, all having to do their own thing, you could honestly get overloaded with the routers very quickly. But overall, this has been working really well. I am looking to switch from Habitat, which is currently running on my Z-Wave light switches, to a Home Assistant setup. But Home Assistant has not been the super clean, easy to use thing that Homebridge is. Home Assistant is a little bit more clunky in my opinion. I know there's a ton of people out there and I know there's so much you can do with it, but for getting stuff just plugged into it that's not designed to work for it, it has not worked nearly as well as I would have liked. And so because of that, I think I'm going to leave the Habitat setup for a while and just keep bringing everything in through Homebridge. Now, if I were to redesign a smart home and build it from scratch, I would definitely start with Z-Wave switches or Zigbee switches. Choose your own. One of those is probably going to win out, and so you just need to do research for what makes sense for you and hope you wouldn't pick the winner. But I would choose all those the same switches and probably build a Home Assistant dashboard. Then have Home Assistant control Z-Wave and everything via a USB stick, a USB dongle. Have that running on a Raspberry Pi and have that integrated with HomeKit. And so that would probably be my ideal setup, because if you have everything already able to work with Home Assistant, there are so many powerful plugins and there's so much you can do with automation through there. Home Assistant is an automator's dream, but because of that, a tinkerer's nightmare, because there's so much tinkering you can do that you end up doing these crazy things. All right, well, that's going to be it for my smart home tour. There's so much going on here and there's going to be a lot more videos. Leave any tutorials like me to make on this stuff in the comments below, and really any other recommended setups you've got for me. I'm fairly new to the full smart home system, so any other recommendations you got for me, I'd love to check out. All right, well, that's going to be it for this. Have a good one. Bye.